Today, on The Human Code, we're joined by Lindsay, a seasoned tech executive and builder behind some of Amazon's most iconic innovations. Over his 15-year career at Amazon, Al helped grow Prime from a fledgling program to a household essential, and most notably, he started and led the engineering team that brought Alexa to life. With over 30 years in software engineering, product leadership, and AI, Al now advises companies on scaling technology and teams. In this episode, we unpack the leadership lessons, innovation mindset, and people first principles that guided him through multiple reinnovations from the early days of telecom to the voice controlled future of today. I am here with, I want to say a new friend, Al Lindsay. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over the past couple weeks and also diving into your book as well. Thank you again for being on the show. And the first question that I have for you is, what got you interested in the intersection of humanity and technology?
Yeah, I think for that, I'd have to go all the way back to my early computing experience because I grew up in an era when PCs were just becoming a thing. Really, in the 80s is when I was in high school and started to dabble in get an interest in technology. And so, as we were just talking about before, this device on over my right shoulder is a VIC-20 made by Commodore. It was the predecessor to the better known Commodore 64. There's also a little cassette player next to it, which is how you would store and retrieve programs. And the whole thing, it has 8K of RAM and was programmed with a basic programming language. And so when I was a kid, I used to spend late nights programming this thing. Often I would subscribe to a magazine called Compute Gazette. And Compute Gazette would have code for games that they put as sort of the centerfold pull out of their magazine every month. And so, once a month I would spend an entire night punching in code from this magazine so I could play games that probably look ridiculous now, like Gorf or Frogger or Centipede, on this device. And so that's kind of how it got started. I took computer science classes in high school, which was, also fairly basic things like Logo, which was Move the Turtle. I don't know. Some of your listeners will probably be familiar with this.
Yeah.
And it's very much an intersection of human, like instant visual. You could draw by moving the turtle around on the screen with the commands, left, right, and the number of spaces to move. So it was the first real WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Programming I had experienced, which is you write some code and you immediately can see it visually, and then correct your errors almost immediately. That led to going to university to study math and computer science at the University of Waterloo in Canada, which was kind of lucky for me because I wasn't the best student in high school and my marks and grades weren't the best. But I had a real affinity for math, and Waterloo used to run these Canadian-wide math competitions at every level. So in ninth grade, it was the Descartes test, and then 10th grade, it was something else. And so my math teachers would pull me aside and basically make me go and write these math tests. And I did really well on them. And it turns out, even with a middling grade point average, I was able to get into Waterloo because of my performance on their math tests. They're like, we see something in you that maybe you don't see, and we're willing to take a risk. Which I'm really grateful for, because that's about the time I got my crap together and figured out how to develop study habits, and actually pulled my grade point average up substantially in my first year of college, which is usually the opposite, I think, for most people. Really fell in love with computer science, and then Waterloo is best known for their co-op program. It's like an internship on steroids. I was only 4 months into my education when I was off at IBM. Working on my first internship, and you kind of do this rhythm of 4 months of school, 4 months of work, all the way through, and you do 6 or 8 work terms over the course of your education. So you come into the workforce much better prepared for what happens next, rather than just being in pure academia for 4 years. And I fell in love with the whole environment. I mean, being at IBM in 1990 during the peak of the operating system wars, OS2, they were still making PCs. The PS2 Mod 90 had just come out. It was really kind of a cool place to be. And then shortly after that, started doing internships at Nortel here on Telecom and working on speech recognition for telecom systems, directory systems 411. You remember the like what city? Is it a residential listing? Those voice recognition systems, I worked on the application side of those. And so when I graduated from Waterloo, I started my career in telecom at Nortel as a full-time employee in Montreal, working on the application layer of voice recognition systems.
Interesting. So this all started you like getting interested in that intersection of humanity and technology, and the path from telecom. I know where the story goes, and at the same time, I'm very curious as to like, did you know that the dots were connecting in the way that they were?
I began as an engineer, a software engineer, writing application code. It wasn't really for end users per se. It was a lot of system level stuff, and I wasn't in love with that aspect. I was a C Unix programmer doing OS level work on a big telecom system for Nortel, and I only lasted a couple of years in that big corporate environment. I kind of hungered for more direct connection to the consumer and having a little more autonomy over what I was doing, because it was really a big machine then. I was there at the time when they were rolling out ISO 9001 compliance, and it was all about documentation and meeting minute notes and repositories and controlling the process, very waterfall-y, if you will, at a time when RUP, the rationally unified process, and a lot of more extreme programming was just becoming a thing. And I felt like I was really missing out on sort of the leading edge of innovation in creating software at a time when this was pre-dot-com bubble burst. And what happened was the telecom deregulation resulted in hundreds of startups in the telecom space, startup ISPs, telco providers, people doing all kinds of innovative things in communications. And there was no software base for them to use to run their businesses because, Bell, AT&T, they had sort of grown up over a century building all of their own systems. There was not a marketplace you could go to get the software you needed to run your telco network or your telco back office, right? There weren't billing and ordering and network management solutions for those companies. So I moved into a series of startups that were trying to serve that marketplace. And this was all happening at internet speed. I mean, the internet was only a few years old, really, at this point. You were mid-90s. These telcos were days old. They were heavily funded from Silicon Valley pre-bubble burst. So tons of money was flowing around. And, the first startup I joined, we went from 30 to 700 people in about a year and a half. And then a year and a half after that, they were back down to 30 or something like that.
Wow.
And it was just like a wild swing of expansion and then contraction as that bubble started to burst. And I stuck with it as long as I could, but by 2004, it was pretty clear that the telecom consolidation was done. The marketplace I'd been in and enjoyed for a short period of time wasn't coming back, and I needed to reinvent myself and go to something completely different, which is what brought me to the West Coast here in Seattle. I joined Amazon in 2004.
Going through those wild rides, I think we're in one of those moments as well where I kind of see like the foundation of what we're seeing with LLMs and AI is kind of creating new opportunities. But at the same time, there's a lot of bubbles that are going to be burst when the practicality of the solutions isn't as evident, or when winners are chosen kind of capacity.
There's a lot of expansion. Yeah, there's a lot of expansion and contraction in these markets. Telecom did it, massively expanded, then contracted, and you have like you said, your winners emerge. This will happen as well with what's going on in the AI space for sure. Yeah.
Going through that though, what were some of the things that you have learned from that expansion and contraction and seeing that? And I got to commend you on noticing when the time is done and moving on to something new.
I might have been a little late there, but I mean,
okay, we can all tell the story differently in the second time through. Yeah,
sure. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess hindsight's always 20/20. What mattered at the end of the day for all of those was the product market fit, and I wasn't yet very well versed on the product side of the house in those roles, and a lot of my customers were enterprise customers. And in the 20 years since then, I've been very consumer focused, and we'll talk about that next. But really that product market fit and knowing who you're building for and why you're building it and driving your business from that matters a lot. And I think in a few of my failed startup cases, maybe we either lost sight of that or maybe the market shifted and we weren't able to react. Most good companies that are durable reinvent themselves constantly as the market changes around them. You can see that with Netflix going from physical DVDs to streaming to content creation. You see that with every successful business. Amazon did it again and again and again as they went digital, digital music, digital video, and so on. So I think that probably a good lesson learned there was around reinvention and trying to look ahead of where the market's going to be, or skate to where the puck's going to be instead of chasing the puck. Is maybe a good analogy there, coming from a hockey player.
That is a very apt analogy. So after 2004, you joined Amazon.
Yeah, which was almost by accident, I have to say, because Amazon, at this point, they were expanding, trying to hire. I think they're what they told me was, we will hire every qualified sort of engineering person we can, because there aren't enough of them, because our bar is so high, and so we just are constantly recruiting, like always be recruiting, right? And so in order to do that, they reached the ceiling where recruiting people in Seattle or getting people to come to Seattle to recruit them, was yielding diminishing returns. So they started doing these recruiting activities where they would just show up in your city, advertise, outreach, and run an event. And so I was hired from a random event that they did in Ottawa, where I was like, it's a low bar and low risk to me to show up at a local hotel and talk to this company from another planet, as far as I'm concerned, and just kind of hear what they have to say. And the cool thing about that was, like, the people that I met blew my mind. They were just like amazing people and then of course I go and do a little bit of research on them and realize, these are pioneers and industry leaders. And I got really excited about the opportunity of just working with smart people. It didn't matter what they were doing. I didn't really know much about what was going on inside Amazon. This was around the time they had started AWS. And in fact, my interview loop was what they call a split loop. There were two different teams who were interviewing, and they would pitch you both roles and let you pick one, because this yields higher success for them in hiring good people. Give them some options for what they're going to be working on, and you're more likely to land them or find a good fit. And so they pitched AWS to me, and I turned it down because it wasn't a thing yet, and retail seemed to be doing pretty well and seemed like a safe thing. And I'm coming from an industry that just imploded and failed. And, I figured I'd better pick something that was going to be around for a couple of years. So I opted for the retail side, or I might have been one of the first 10 employees on AWS. I'm sure it would have taken a very different path, but it still turned out just fine, I'd say. So that's how I ended up at Amazon. And it was a big deal, changing countries, changing coasts. And I had 3 little kids. So I came out here. I'm still in Seattle, by the way. And it's been 21 years. And I tell people I'm in year 21 of a 2-year plan. The idea was to come out for a couple of years, kind of get my feet back on the ground, figure out what's going on. It would just be an adventure. And I fell in love with the culture of early Amazon. 2004, the entire tech org was around 500 people. They hadn't yet started things like Kindle. They were still very much in the physical world, BMVD, books, music, DVDs, and shipping physical products and optimizing warehouses. But they brought me in to run 5 or 6 engineering teams that were in the retail space of expansion. So they had just expanded into sporting goods, jewelry. I helped them launch the grocery tab, the first one, the endless club aisle, we called it. And they were finding that the website, everything looked like a book. It was built for selling books and DVDs and things that were, roughly this size and shape. And so the imagery and the tooling and the features weren't suitable for clothing and apparel and shoes and jewelry. And so the idea was, we need to out-niche the niche players. How are we going to compete with Zappos, which, by the way, I was heavily involved in a lot of that. And in the end, we ended up buying them. But we launched bespoke websites, endless.com, to try to compete with them, to create that user interface. And here I think you can start to see more of a turn towards the human element of it. You know, if you're shopping for shoes or a handbag, the experience of doing that online is challenging for a bunch of reasons, and making that functional and useful and visceral, really. A lot of it is like, oh, I love the way this looks. I want to see more things that look like that. Or, you know, I can't really describe why I like it, but I want to see, you know, more of that. You know, those were the types of problems we were trying to solve. And that was kind of those were my early days. So building and launching things like the loose diamond finder and create your own diamond ring. And we actually had a jeweler in a warehouse, and he had an entire locker full of diamonds, and people would buy specific diamonds using the diamond ring finder, which had these sliders for cut, color, clarity. And then he could select that exact diamond and put it in the setting, and you could buy your engagement ring on Amazon. And this was kind of like stretching what online retail was at the time. So that was a lot of fun. I did that for the first 2 years in Amazon before writing the next chapter.
It's always interesting thinking about like a site that many of us go to at least on a weekly basis, and thinking about where it came from and the challenges that we had in those early days of online retail. I remember even talking to people in around 2004 when they were still hesitant to be putting a credit card online, and had no kind of concept that like the world was going to flow in that direction. And like people wanted physical, they wanted something that they could touch. And yet you're sitting there solving the challenges of, you know, serving up products that people never have bought online, and getting them to actually trust in the process enough to go with it. So
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue, but I won't take it yet for what Amazon Prime did, because one of the biggest challenges was all of online shopping back then came with these heavy shipping fees and uncertainty of if and when you would ever get the product, and usually it was weeks. And that was all part of the experience as well, the human experience of shopping online. And I think now most places where you shop, you have a much better promise of when you're going to get things. But Amazon really was an inventor in that space. But the next thing I did was actually take over and run the DVD rental business in Europe. So in 2004, I think it was December 2004, shortly after I arrived, one of my peer teams launched a DVD rental service in Europe that looked very much like Netflix, shoving DVDs into envelopes. It launched in the UK, Germany. Netflix wasn't in Europe at the time. They were in the US and Canada. And this business was really interesting. It had a lot of interesting elements. There was the fulfillment element. You'll remember Netflix actually ran something called the Netflix Prize competition for years because the algorithmic challenges of deciding how much inventory to buy and how to allocate discs based on people's wish lists, so that you're keeping customers happy, shipping them things off the top of their list frequently, but not buying all the new releases in mass amounts so that you can always ship the top, because 3 months after a new release comes out, nobody wants it anymore, and you've got all these idle DVDs on your shelves, and it destroys the finances of the business. So that was really interesting. So we rebuilt the whole customer experience website for how you manage your queues and your lists. We did a lot of innovation on the algorithms that made decisions behind the scenes. And, I got to learn a lot about international business as well. While in parallel, one of my peers was busy building the streaming service, which is now Prime Video. Because we knew inevitably that this was a dying business and we needed to reinvent ourselves in parallel, just like Netflix knew that. But the business was just a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun to be involved in that.
I mean, it is fascinating because like you are talking about algorithms that we didn't have at the time, right? Like one of the big things I also studied computer science with a focus on artificial intelligence. And like one thing that we talked about was we don't have enough compute to make any of these things work. And then we also didn't have enough data to make, some of the machine learning type algorithms work. Yet here you are working at Amazon and having enough reach in the early 2000s to basically say like, hey, we have millions of customers. How can we figure out like, what are they actually looking for? What are they going to want to buy? And how do we make sure that we can make it available to them at that right time? And so absolutely amazing what you guys were able to accomplish.
Yeah, it was I'd say there were a lot of early techniques. AI gets thrown around as a term a lot now, but I mean, back then we would have talked about OR or ML, so like machine learning and or even expert systems if you're going to talk about AI in the early days. And there are a lot of sophisticated computer science math techniques that are at play and were at play early in things like, customer reviews at Amazon, similarities, people who bought this also bought that. And a lot of it is, some of those CS fundamentals, so linear programming, constraint-based propagation, expert systems, alpha beta pruning. And we used a lot of those different techniques. By the way, in the startups in telecom as well, if you want to design a least cost circuit through a telecom network, you're using a lot of these methodologies and techniques that look a lot like AI today. And we're just sort of early predecessors and things that have evolved into that science. So yeah, there was a lot of that for sure on the DB rental project, and the algorithms that decided who gets what disk next were sort of the core of like the business, really. If you got it wrong, the finances aren't going to work. You're going to have the wrong. Your customers will be unhappy. They're not going to get what they want, and you're going to spend too much on the wrong stuff. And it was really interesting when they do new releases. You get one shot to guess how many copies you're going to need and place your order way in advance, and then they come. And if you are wrong, it's really hard to go back and change it. You can't just a day later buy 20,000 more copies and have them in a week. When they do the release, it's funny, but you pretty much have to have a crystal ball, which is why Netflix did their prize program.
It's almost worse than owning a restaurant, right? Like, if you think about it, restaurants have inventory of food, right? That's just going to expire and go bad if they don't move it. But at the same time, you're talking about this at a far different scale of if you order too many DVDs, you've ruined it. If you order too few, you've irritated the customer base and they're not going to come to you for the next release. And so, yeah, it's a remarkable challenge that like you ended up solving.
And the cool thing is, and this is true of Prime as well, it is at the intersection of trying to create the best customer experience. Customers don't care about our inventory challenges or our problems getting stuff in the post to them reliably and fast. Customers care that they're paying money, they made a list, and they returned a disc, and they want the next disc that's at the top of their list as fast as possible. And so we could get to the point where we could turn it around in 2 days. In the UK, the Royal Mail was pretty efficient. And we could tune our warehouse so that in the morning we open a bag, we see that you returned a disc and you're eligible for a new disc same day. And later that day, there's a crate going out in the post that has stuff for you, so that we're creating the best possible experience. But at the end of the day, if we're constantly sending you the third item on your list, you're not going to be happy. Right. So, and we could make that better by throwing money at it and just having more inventory of all those new releases. It's generally the head of the demand, but then your business falls apart. And so you're trading off customer experience with your business goals, as Amazon always has been. If you take a look at the Prime program, it's similar. And I guess that's a good segue where I ended up next. I had the fortune to go and spend time in the UK on the ground with my family for 6 months at the end of my tenure on that program. So the international experience was a blast as well, and at a really treasured time in my life. But so when I came back to the US and found a new role within Amazon, because we divested the DVD rental business, ultimately, like I said, we knew it was going to transition into the streaming business, and it was sort of a temporary thing. But we wanted to get all those customers, transitioned onto the new platform as well. So I came back to Prime, and at this point, Amazon Prime is already 5 years old, but still small, like less than 200,000 subscribers, and it didn't yet have, there was no Prime Video, all these various programs that have been added on since. It was still just a shipping program, and we didn't yet have same day, next day. It was kind of the same shipping program, $79 all you can eat, 2 days shipping if you're in the right place, which didn't include Hawaii, Alaska, or most other countries. So I spent 3 years leading the technical organization for Prime, which was really instructive because we accelerated growth. And it wasn't just things we did, it was things Amazon did. So by introducing a tablet, which I've got one on the shelf behind me here, and Prime Instant Video, and making it a Prime benefit, that made a major lift. And then we launched, the Amazon Mom program, the Amazon Student program. As long as you're a student, get it for free. Let's get you into the program early. And then as you graduate and become a consumer, you start to pay for it. It makes more sense. You're you're used to the convenience of it. So a lot of growth, and a lot of the systems that were built needed to, well, basically we ended up in a legacy scenario very quickly and early in our life, and we had to invent ourselves out of it. So there was a lot of sort of technological overhaul learnings that came from that, while managing rapid growth and rapid expansion. And it was also a program that was highly integrated into dozens of other teams across Amazon who had to do heavy lifting for us to do our job as well. The ordering team, the warehouse software, all of these other teams that we had to work with to coordinate to make it work. So there was a lot of really good learnings there about driving an aggressive program where you don't actually have control of, more than half of the things that you need to influence to be successful. So there was a lot of good lessons learned in that one as well. And it was also a fun project. So spent 3 years on that, and then kind of got it to the state where, things were running well, and I felt, it's kind of funny. I felt it was time for a change, and it's kind of funny because one of the things I really liked about Amazon, and a lot of the people I know who spent long careers there, was that you could constantly reinvent yourself. So in the normal workforce, you have to quit your job and go across the street to do the next thing. And in Amazon, they really encourage that internal movement. And in a company that's growing so fast and hiring so fast, having a bunch of veterans kind of moving around to different teams, seeding new teams, getting involved in launches of new things, helps permeate the culture, the tribal knowledge. It's a recipe for success in rapid growth, is that movement. So we really had it codified into our culture. If someone wanted to move to another role, as long as they're in good standing, your manager could only hold you back for 15 days and they had to let you go because that's the right thing for the company. So 3 years was a long time. I'd say the average time in a role for a lot of people was about 2 years. That's probably the mean time. So at 3 years, I was starting to get the itch again and wanted to go and do something new. And that's when I had a fortuitous conversation with Greg Hart. And this story I think is in the book, but he was the Jeff's shadow at the time, his right-hand man. That role is usually held for about 18 months. And then at the end of your tenure, where you kind of spend every day, all day with Jeff, and you see everything that's going on across the company, is kind of a master class in how Amazon is run. And it's a VP level role. And then you go off and start something new, typically is what happens. And so Greg had been tasked with this thing that became Alexa and Echo as the project Jeff wanted him to run as he rolled off.
How was the decision come about? Like, what was the product's kind of like, what was the envisioned idea, the vision for what Alexa could be?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's been sort of shared publicly. I think it began as an idea, the idea of ambient computing, or a computing device that has its brains in the cloud. So the piece of equipment that's in your home or your business would be very minimal. It wouldn't need, like a hard drive and a powerful CPU, and you wouldn't need a screen or a keyboard or a mouse. It could be as simple as a device with a speaker and a microphone that's connected to the internet. And
yeah,
you have to put this together contextually, that this is around the time AWS is starting to take off, and the movement to the cloud is really gathering steam. And the potential for cloud computing is really, there's a lot of thought going into what else can we do with this. So I don't know this to be the case, but I'm sure that played a role in, hey, what if we took, a desktop computer and reinvented it by putting its brains in the cloud? What would it look like? Well, you wouldn't need any of these peripherals, right? You wouldn't need a big, so could that be? And then you start to realize, well, that could be a ubiquitous device, like at $10 or $15 for an inexpensive piece of hardware. You could have one in every room in your house, and just, and I think I hear the Star Trek computer as one of the early visions. Like
Okay.
as you start to think about just talking to a device in a room that's cloud connected and is super intelligent. Um, the best proxy or analogy for it is the Star Trek computer. Literally anywhere on the Enterprise, you can just speak to the ambient air and get results or a response or action taken. And it's a voice in, voice out kind of interface. So this became sort of a sounding board for us, or I guess what's the word I'm looking for, a lightning rod, like that
Having
became
that as the North Star kind of helps. And so, like, we're talking, what year was this again?
2011.
So 2011, right? Like, we're heavily with BlackBerry, right? Like, kind of in that was the mood. Did we have the iPhone at that point?
The iPhone was around version 2, because I think it started in '08 or '09, and Siri wasn't yet a thing. But shortly after we formed and launched, I think it was around November of 2011 that Siri launched. So it wasn't long after we got going in earnest that Siri was introduced.
Yeah. So, like, the time frame that we're talking about is still early cloud and early kind of like smartphone usage. We're just getting to like having apps more than having text messages and emails and calendaring, like a super PDA type of approach. And you've set off with the vision of like this ambient computing device that is just there. And I I've got to say there's probably some both technical challenges that you went through, but more that I'd like to get into is more the organizational dynamics of like how do you bring a product like this to market that has had such great success, and from an organization that is, also can throw millions of users at any one product within a couple months notice.
It was multifaceted and parallel, to say the least. And I think, in the beginning, there were just like a handful of us. So I was hired to build and lead the engineering science technical organization. Greg built up a parallel product organization. And then there was a hardware team at Lab 126 in California that was building the actual physical device. And in September of 2011, when I started, there were two or three of us day one, because Greg recruited a few other folks in parallel with me, who joined my team right away. There was an early acquisition of a company that was in the speech recognition space who had a speech recognition engine, but more importantly, a number of scientists. So Amazon didn't have anyone in the speech space at this time. They didn't have any expertise. And I think we had a pretty good idea from early on that we were going to have to build it as a core competency. It was going to become an important user interface aspect, not just limited to Alexa. We could already see its value in the Fire Phone, which was underway at the time, and across the whole suite of things that Amazon offers. So we went after these things in parallel. One is, how do we build up a bench of talent and recruit for it? And I could talk about, we opened up an office, started recruiting people in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because there was a concentration of people with that skill set working for Microsoft and Nuance and other companies, coming out of MIT. It was a place to be if you were going to be in speech, and we needed to go there. And interestingly, Amazon didn't have a footprint in Massachusetts at that point, because of tax implications, I would assume. I'm not going to claim to know for sure, but every retail state where we had an office meant we had tax implications. And Amazon was still playing. That's ancient history now, but back then there was do we have to collect tax from our customers on retail in a state because we have a corporate presence? So anyways, we opened Massachusetts for Amazon because speech was so important. Hired a great leader on the ground there, and in Bill Barton, and he ran fast at building out a great team there that ultimately ended up building the speech recognition engine. We acquired two other companies in Europe, one in Cambridge, UK, called Evie, which was a Wolfram Alpha type knowledge base with an interface of natural language generation and natural language understanding, to query that knowledge base. And and I talk about these acquisitions in the book. In the European acquisitions, the other one being Ivona, which is the voice of Alexa, the text to speech voices. After we bought those companies, we built them up. We added more people, more resources, gave them large charters. Their leaders stayed in place and ran after excellence in their space, in parallel with all the other things that were going on. And that's the only way this could have scaled. If we didn't have outstanding leaders on the ground in Poland, who are the founders of Ivona, who started the work in the high quality text to speech voices, running with that and scaling it and turning it into the voices that ultimately became the voices of Alexa around the world in all the various languages, I think we would have struggled to succeed. And you can kind of see that pattern repeated in different locations with different skill sets, people running in parallel, and then bringing it together and integrating it early and often into hobbled together products. I actually have a prototype behind me. Long before we even knew what our hardware was going to look like, we had this basic prototype, which was, here's a speaker with a microphone, and plug it in, and we'd connect it to a Mac Mini and start writing code right away that could play music or create a reminder or to do, before we even had a lot of the elements in place. And actually, before we even did speech, we did text. We built these text interfaces so that we could kind of exercise the system. But one of the things we did is because we grew really fast, we grew by acquisition, we grew by hiring, we ended up in a dozen different locations out of necessity to tap the right type of talent. And it could have been total chaos, but it wasn't. And I think we did a good job of bringing in together as a cohesive team, following a common vision with lots of touch points. I was on the road a lot. My leaders traveled a ton. I spent as much time as I could in all the different locations, trying to bring it together. We did virtual. So this was also before the time of Zoom and all. Now we all take it for granted that every meeting has a bunch of Hollywood squares on the screen, right? And sorry, showing my age. But we had Chime inside Amazon at this time, and my meetings already looked like that. Like any meeting I had in 2011, 2012, even the early days of Alexa, there would be people on screen from the UK, from Germany, from Poland, from California, from Boston, and we were running like it was 2025 in those early days, because that's what it took to act like a single cohesive team with all that geographic dispersion.
Like, a couple key things that I've pulled from this is, like, you've got to be where the talent is. There are centers of excellence around the world as far as the talent that you can grab. But then additionally, that communication coordination is absolutely a necessity to make sure that you're still, going to where the puck is going to be together, because we're all reading the rink in different ways. But like, if you're not communicating, then you're not exactly playing the same game together. And so having that, and like, I spent a good portion of the later 2000s and early 2010s traveling around quite a bit as well. But we also spent a ton of time on the phone making those communications happen so that we could have that the distributed teams had the information that they needed. And it also sounds like each one of your distributed teams had a clear goal as far as like how their part played into the larger picture.
I like to think that was the case. At least that's the way I remember it. Because as a leader, if it wasn't the case, it was my fault. So, but yes, I could name the leader in each of those locations, and each of them had their goals and charters and deliverables. And then, there's another expression I use, which is darken the skies with developers. This comes back to a consulting mindset that some people had in telecom, but we encouraged our senior scientists, engineers, et cetera, to get together as frequently as they could in person, in addition to doing virtual work at the time, recognizing that the high bandwidth of being in a room together with a whiteboard, working through problems is very important. So I like to think there was a lot of not just leaders traveling around, but team members collaborating, building relationships, moving around to the different locations. That was important. The other thing we did that I thought was really helpful for us was very early we established the Friday, I used to call it beers and questions. I think it's something I adopted from the startups in telecom, where we were literally a company of 35 people and we all fit in the kitchen on our Friday afternoon. We had some beers and the founders would get up and talk about whatever it was, the latest round of funding, our newest customer, the latest hardware prototype. We'd give demos, and it was really a gelling experience for everyone on the team to because your head's down in your space all week, and then you come and you take a look at the bigger picture. Kind of, it's an opportunity to reinforce constantly what the vision is, where we're going. Here's the rope, we're all pulling on it, and we did that with Alexa from the beginning. And as we grew, and we did it with virtual participation, so it didn't matter where you were invited to for any beers and questions. And then eventually we got so big that we had 2 meeting rooms side by side, and we would set up screens, and we'd still be doing it in person. Greg and I often would sit at the front and talk about what was going on. And we, half the team would be next door watching it on TV, but we're still there. And then when the talking's over, we could mingle. But it really, I found that for me anyways, really cemented that feeling of one team pulling in one direction. And I still talk to folks today, and they remember some of the other things we did: the picnics, the barbecues in the courtyard, the fun aspects of being a team. Amazon's slogan is work hard, have fun, make history, and we put a lot of emphasis on. We really, really worked hard, and so I made it my mandate to make sure that we took time to play hard when the time was appropriate as well. And then ultimately, I think we did make a little bit of history here.
I would say so. I mean, you definitely made it into the homes of millions of people, and there is Alexa is one of the words that is frequently said many, many times a day. I gotta say, I know all of this is a lot of I think some of the stories that you shared today have been wrapped up in a book that you're putting together. Is there any other insights that you would love to drop on us from that publication?
I know you've had a chance to peruse it. So first, a word on Kindle Digital Publishing allows you to publish a book and then go back and keep adding chapters. So I think of this as V1, and there's half a dozen lessons in there. And the reason, and my inspiration to write down some of these lessons is now I operate as a consultant, helping sort of C-suite boards and executives sort of navigate their own challenges in scaling, innovation, leadership, process, et cetera. And I see the same patterns coming up again and again. And so I thought it'd be helpful to write them down somewhere in the context of having learned some ways of handling those patterns of challenges. That was the genesis of the book. And so the first 5 or 6 chapters that are in there talk about some of the things we've talked about here, scaling through acquisition, how to successfully integrate acquisitions, how to lead such a massive distributed team, how to handle invention and invention risk. Because ultimately you want everything on a timeline. With Alexa, you had a piece of hardware that was being manufactured, and anyone who's been in a hardware business knows you have very little wiggle room. Once you decide to go to production and start manufacturing things, your finances are brittle. You better hit your date. And so all this complex software coming together to go together with a fairly simple device, really, because most of it's cloud-based complexity. If we start sliding on the software delivery, you just at some point you end up with a landfill of wasted hardware. And so there's a lot of complexity to managing. How do we solve far field speech recognition on some sort of a timeline so that we can have confidence that when we launch, and there's some interesting stories in there around how we approach data collection, the cold start problem that a lot of AI companies face today. How we put invention on a timeline by really decomposing it into hundreds of smaller experiments and things that the science team was going to try, and sort of measuring progress as we went until we hit on a few of them. But at least, even if you can't determine when the breakthrough will come, you can schedule the work of attempting to get to the breakthrough to make sure that you keep pushing that along. There were a lot of aspects to it that were, I think, informative and useful for companies today who are trying to figure out how to do AI at scale.
I love it. And I think that's fascinating. Yeah, because I had a chance to peruse it, and the stories are fascinating. The insights I really enjoyed from how you're looking at we spoke about some of the agile methodologies. We spoke about the empowering talent, and then additionally how you're actually looking at far field speech recognition and what you were talking about just then was, I think we're seeing it today when we talk about using like agentic AI in situations. There's a lot of opportunity to try to like make something happen. We know that it's just beyond like the next breakthrough sometimes when we're building out a process or like working with a set of agents and trying to get them to become consistent in their work. But it is an experimentation at some point. And so treating it as such, but recognizing that there is a breakthrough there, there is enough opportunity. We know hundreds of different ways to try something out. And as long as we continue to beat on the pavement, we're going to get past that next milestone.
And there's even more to it than that, because if you do that experimentation in an environment that is so far removed from your production environment that once you finally have the breakthrough, now you have a year of development to get it ready to go to production. I'm not going to pick on the company across the lake too much, but there are research branches of large tech companies where I think they struggle with that. Like the research operates very researchy. You know, they're using 4GL languages and everything's mocked up, and there's no real engineering discipline to the way they operate. To now, if you want to bring that to production, you know, you really need to productize all of your pipelines and your data management and everything, annotation and model building, and can you reliably reproduce models from the same data sets? And you know, when you just have random files on some scientist's laptop and they produce something that kind of works, and you're like, we got it. What we found was over time we had to really get more and more mature about, you know, our model building pipelines and all of the infrastructure that goes into the research and science and experimentation side. And then as those environments start to look a lot more like your production environment, the path from the lab to consumers is much smaller. And I think there's a lot of value in that, in shortening those cycles so that you can just innovate quickly and iteratively and put those things into production very fast.
It's a great lesson to be learning. Because we've one company that comes to mind is Nokia. They had an enormous R&D budget, and the budget was so large in R&D that it basically led to just infighting amongst the R&D departments. And one of the losses was that they actually had invented the iPad and had it almost, I mean, at least in a state where they could demo and showcase it and produce, but just got lost in the mix.
You know, Xerox Research Park is probably the most iconic example, but we've all heard those stories.
Yeah, we've heard everybody going in and out of there, taking whatever they wanted. Exactly.
Some guy with a black turtleneck. Yeah.
Well, and the other guy from Seattle too. Yeah. Amazing. Al, I got to say, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Now, the stuff that you're doing now, I think also leads into like the content of the book. And so I want to make sure that when we have it published, we'll put a link in the show notes as well. Is there any other, like anything else that's exciting you about the future of where we're going?
Well, I mean, obviously these recent breakthroughs in large language models are enabling so much excitement and potential, and most people haven't figured out how to uncork it yet. And that's one of the areas that we're trying to help our clients with. You know, I think the next 5 years are going to be really exciting. And then, as you said, there'll probably be a bunch of consolidation, contraction, but right now it's very much in the expansion phase. And I think it is going to change everything that we understand today. It's going to change the way education and schools teach. It's going to change the way finance departments and large corporations work. It's going to change just about everything about business that we take for granted today, in the same way that PCs and spreadsheets and word processing, you know, completely reinvented the way people did business. I will say I don't believe it's going to create the obsolescence of the computer programmer. I really agree with what Tim O'Reilly wrote about that. I don't know if you've seen his article, but you know, there have been a dozen reinventions of the programmer in our lifetime, and this is just another one of them. But you know, the skill sets that'll be valuable will change as they always do, and the technologies that you use will change as they always have. But I think it's a really, really interesting and exciting time to be in technology, which is why, even though I'm not in an operating role building things in the space, I actually have this wonderful opportunity with Tequity to be involved in dozens of companies' efforts in these spaces across all kinds of different sectors. So I'm getting a much better cross section of how it's changing entire industries rather than just inside my company where I'm narrowly focused on building and shipping something. So that gets me out of bed every morning and excited to see what the day holds.
Oh, that is really cool. Once again, Al, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak to us.
My pleasure. We went way over.
Thank you for tuning into The Human Code, sponsored by Findustries, where we harness AI to elevate your business. By improving operational efficiency and accelerating growth, we turn opportunities into reality. Let Findustries be your guide to AI mastery, making success inevitable. Explore how at findustries.co.